High above Pacific City lived Ethan Vance, a billionaire king in a kingdom of his own making. He had everything: power, wealth, control. But what happens when that meticulously crafted world is shattered by a single, outrageous bet? A bet that forces him to marry a woman from a world he didn't even know existed. A woman who would not only challenge his arrogance, but expose the gaping void within his own heart. This is the story of Ethan Vance and the audacious wager that changed everything. At 45, Ethan had achieved what most only dreamed of. He wasn't born into old money, he made it. He built Vance Innovations from a garage startup into a tech empire, a titan in an industry that revered innovation and ruthlessness in equal measure. He had wealth that could buy islands, power that swayed markets, influence that opened doors to the highest echelons of society. He had it all. And that, paradoxically, was his deepest problem. Because beneath the bespoke suits, the perfectly coiffed hair, and the polished veneer of success lay an unshakable arrogance, a deep-seated belief that everything and everyone had a price. And if it didn't, it simply wasn't worth his time. His social circle? A mirror of his own carefully constructed image, elitist, self-congratulatory, and hermetically sealed from the messy, inconvenient realities of everyday life. Tonight, Ethan was hosting one of his infamous gatherings. The penthouse pulsed with the low hum of power, the clinking of crystal glasses, the scent of money and ambition. Expensive champagne flowed like water, laughter echoed across the luxurious space, and conversations revolved around billion-dollar deals, private jets, and the occasional thinly veiled mockery of those outside their gilded cage. Ethan moved through it all, a king surveying his kingdom, accepting the deference, basking in the artificial glow of admiration. He was the center of his universe, and frankly, he was bored out of his mind. This is where Marcus Thorne enters. Marcus, a longtime acquaintance and an occasional rival in the cutthroat world of venture capital, wasn't impressed by Ethan's usual displays of dominance. He saw through the polished exterior, straight to the predictable, cynical core. As Ethan nursed his whiskey, a casual comment from Marcus pierced the hum of the party. "Ethan," Marcus drawled, his voice cutting through the polite chatter. "You know, for a man who's conquered the world, you seem surprisingly unchallenged. Predictable, even." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Predictable, Marcus? I built an empire from nothing. What's predictable about that?" Marcus chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Oh, the building was impressive. But now? You're playing chess with yourself, Ethan. You're so comfortable, so in control. Everything fits your mold." Marcus took a sip of his own drink, then leaned in, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "I'll make you a wager. $50 million of investment into Vance Innovations, no strings attached. If you can do something truly unpredictable, truly un-Ethan, marry a woman who is the absolute antithesis of everything you seek. Someone who doesn't fit your mold, who isn't conventionally perfect by your standards, who comes from a completely different world. And here's the catch, Ethan. You'd have to stay married for 6 months. No tricks, no loopholes. A genuine marriage, on paper, for half a year. $50 million? To Ethan it was a pittance, but the challenge, the audacity of it. Marcus was daring him to step outside his carefully constructed reality, to relinquish control, even for a moment. It wasn't about the money. It was about proving his absolute dominance, proving that he could conquer any challenge, even one that involved the messy, unpredictable realm of human connection. He saw the wager not as a risk, but as another game, an opportunity to prove his superiority, to show Marcus and himself that even the most unpredictable variables could be bent to his will. He believed, with every fiber of his being that he could win. He would find this opposite woman, use her, collect his winnings, and then discard her, returning to his gilded cage, perhaps even more convinced of his own invincibility. What he didn't realize, as he confidently extended his hand to seal the audacious wager, was that he wasn't about to play a game. He was about to embark on a journey that would shatter his meticulously built world, force him to confront the hollow emptiness within himself, and irrevocably change the very definition of what it meant to win. But first, he had to find her, the woman who would be his pawn in this high-stakes game. And the search for her would lead him to a part of Pacific City he never knew existed, to a reality far removed from his own, and to a woman who possessed a strength that no amount of money could ever buy. The wager was sealed, but the real challenge had just begun. Ethan, ever the strategist, immediately tasked his chief of staff, Chloe, with the impossible: find the antithesis. Not just someone different, but someone fundamentally opposite to him in every conceivable way. Someone who didn't orbit his world of power dinners and private jets. Chloe, sharp and efficient, dove into the data, moving beyond the usual demographic filters of wealth and influence. She was looking for an outlier. And what she found, tucked away in the vibrant, beating heart of Pacific City's often overlooked neighborhoods, was Naomi Jenkins. Naomi Jenkins was a storm in human form, a force of nature driven by compassion and an unyielding spirit. At 38, she was the founder and tireless director of the Harbor Light Initiative, a nonprofit organization that served as a lifeline for underserved communities in Pacific City, a food pantry that never turned anyone away, a tutoring program for kids whose schools were failing them, a legal aid clinic offering a glimmer of hope. Naomi had built it all from the ground up, fueled by a belief that every individual, regardless of their circumstances, deserved dignity and opportunity. She wasn't just a social worker. She was a warrior, a quiet revolutionary. Her days were spent navigating grant applications, mediating community disputes, and comforting those who had nowhere else to turn. Her hands were often calloused, her face lined with the weight of her responsibilities, but her eyes, those beautiful, determined eyes, held an unshakable fire. She embodied everything Ethan Vance was not: grounded, selfless, and profoundly connected to the real world. Chloe presented Naomi's profile to Ethan. He scrolled through it, a flicker of surprise, then intrigue crossing his face. No designer clothes, no high society events, no pretense, just raw, impactful work. "Set up a meeting," Ethan commanded, his voice edged with a new, unfamiliar curiosity. He decided to approach her under the guise of corporate philanthropy, a strategic move to ease into her world without revealing his true, cynical intentions. He'd frame it as a mutually beneficial partnership. Vance Innovations would enhance its public image, and Harbor Light Initiative would receive much-needed funding. Clean, transactional, just how Ethan liked it. The first meeting was a clash of titans, though only one of them knew the battle was brewing. Ethan, accustomed to charming or intimidating his way through negotiations, found himself facing a woman who was warm yet unyielding. Naomi saw right through his polished veneer. She dealt with enough self-serving philanthropists to recognize the type. He spoke in terms of return on investment and brand visibility. She spoke of human dignity and real-world impact. The chasm between their worlds was stark, a silent, almost palpable presence in the room. Then Ethan laid out his proposition, cloaked in corporate jargon: a generous, multi-million-dollar donation to Harbor Light Initiative in exchange for a temporary symbolic marriage. "It's a mutually beneficial arrangement, Miss Jenkins," he articulated smoothly. My company improves its public image, and your organization receives the resources it desperately needs. He watched her closely, expecting the immediate, greedy acquiescence he always got. He was a billionaire. Who would say no to that? But Naomi Jenkins wasn't just anyone. She had poured her heart and soul every waking moment for the past decade into Harbor Light. She had weathered countless rejections, endured sleepless nights worrying about keeping the doors open, felt the crushing weight of responsibility for the hundreds of lives that depended on her. Frustration gnawed at her, but she refused to let it consume her. She loathed the idea of a sham marriage. The very notion felt like a betrayal of her principles. But the faces of the children she served flashed in her mind, the struggling families who lined up for food, the desperate calls for help that often went unanswered due to lack of funds. This wasn't about her pride. It was about their survival. This, she realized, was a chance to finally break through the wall of systemic indifference, to provide a lifeline for her community that she couldn't otherwise secure. So, with a heavy heart and a resolve forged in fire, Naomi agreed, but not without conditions. Her voice, though quiet, was firm, echoing with an authority that surprised Ethan. I'll continue my work as I see fit, without interference from you. Every cent you provide goes directly to the community. And our marriage, it will be in name only. My life, my work, my integrity remain untouched. Ethan, momentarily thrown by her resolve, quickly recovered. These were minor stipulations. The bet was within his grasp. He had found his opposite, and she had agreed. What he hadn't grasped was that while he thought he was pulling Naomi into his world, she was about to, quite unintentionally, pull him into hers. And that world, the real world, was far more complex, beautiful, and challenging than he could ever have imagined. The stage was set. A marriage born of cynical calculation was about to begin. But as the ink dried on the prenuptial agreement, neither Ethan nor Naomi truly understood the profound and unexpected collision of worlds that was about to unfold. The wedding would be merely the beginning. The wedding was a blur of efficiency, devoid of emotion. Ethan, in his custom-tailored suit, stood beside Naomi in a simple, elegant dress. The silence in the grand hall punctuated only by the officiant's monotone voice. There were no beaming family members from Naomi's side, a deliberate choice on her part to shield her loved ones from this cynical arrangement. Ethan, meanwhile, observed the proceedings with a detached satisfaction, as if he had just closed another lucrative deal. This wasn't a union of hearts. It was a contract, a transaction. And for Ethan, it was a victory in his game. Life in the penthouse, that sprawling monument to Ethan's success, became a testament to their profound disconnect. Naomi, with a quiet but firm resolve, immediately claimed the guest suite as her own. It was a clear signal to Ethan she had no plans to share more than the title of wife. The vast, luxurious space, filled with priceless art and panoramic city views, felt cavernous and empty, mirroring the emotional void between them. Ethan, accustomed to bending others to his will, was baffled by her indifference. He tried to impress her with lavish gifts, expensive jewelry, designer clothes, but Naomi would politely yet firmly refuse them, her gaze unwavering. I'd rather see that money go toward building a new community center, Mr. Vance, she'd say, redirecting his attempts at superficial generosity into tangible help for her people. This was a completely new experience for Ethan. His usual tactics, the ones that had always worked, simply bounced off Naomi's unyielding integrity. But the terms of their agreement dictated that Ethan had to at least outwardly engage with Naomi's world. His first visit to the Beacon Community Center was less a polite obligation and more a sensory assault. Stepping out of his sleek, chauffeured car, Ethan was immediately confronted by a reality starkly different from his own. Crumbling buildings, vibrant graffiti scrawled on brick walls, uneven sidewalks, the sounds of children playing amidst the rumble of city buses. His tailored suit, a second skin in his usual environment, now felt like a neon sign proclaiming, "I don't belong here." He felt a prickle of discomfort, almost a revulsion, at the raw, unpolished energy of the place. Then he saw Naomi in her element. She wasn't the reserved woman from their formal meetings. Here she was magnetic. She moved with purpose, a comforting presence, pausing to greet families by name, comfort-crying children, organize donations with a practiced ease. Her energy was magnetic, a beacon of light in a neighborhood he'd always simply flown over. As she directed him to a shelf filled with canned goods, a task so utterly mundane to him, he observed the faces around him, tired, worn, but grateful. He thought of the millions of dollars that flowed through Vance Innovations daily. 200 families helped by a food pantry seemed like a small number. But then he caught himself. The thought felt tone-deaf, cold. He found himself asking Naomi, almost against his will, "Why do you do this?" Naomi looked at him, her gaze direct, devoid of judgment. "Because someone has to, Ethan," she said simply, her voice carrying a weight he couldn't quite comprehend. "Because I can't stand the thought of doing nothing when I know I can help." Her words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the hollow echoes of his own life. For the first time, in a place he considered beneath him, Ethan Vance felt a tremor in his carefully constructed world. A tiny crack had appeared. He didn't know it yet, but that crack would soon widen, letting in a light he never knew he needed. A light that would expose the dark corners of his own soul and force him to confront the inconvenient truth. His version of winning might just be the most profound loss of all. That day, amidst the chaos and compassion of the beacon, Ethan Vance received his first, unwitting lesson. A lesson not in power or profit, but in the quiet, undeniable strength of purpose. The question now was, would he be willing to learn more? Or would his arrogance continue to blind him? That initial tremor Ethan felt at the Beacon Community Center, it was quickly overshadowed by the deeply ingrained habits of a lifetime of control, of having his will be done. His brief glimpse into Naomi's world was intriguing, yes, but it wasn't enough to instantly dismantle the fortress of his ego. He quickly defaulted to what he knew best, trying to impose his will, to bend her to his expectation. He saw her as a variable he needed to manage to fit into his narrative for the wager. Ethan began scheduling Naomi for his high-profile charity galas and exclusive social events. He genuinely believed he was doing her a favor, introducing her to a better world, a world of power and influence that could surely benefit her nonprofit more than the humble community center. He watched, almost proudly, as she walked into the grand ballroom, but his pride quickly turned to confusion. Naomi, despite her quiet elegance, didn't blend. She simply stood apart. At one particularly extravagant gala, a prominent socialite airily dismissed Naomi after a brief introduction. "How noble," she drawled, her voice dripping with thinly veiled condescension, turning her attention immediately to the woman on her other side, leaving Naomi standing awkwardly. Ethan, in his oblivious arrogance, hadn't even noticed the slight. He was too busy congratulating himself on his public image. But Naomi had endured enough. Her patience, though vast, had its limits. One evening, after yet another soul-numbing event, she confronted him, her voice quiet but firm as steel. "This isn't working, Ethan," she stated, her gaze unwavering. "You dragging me to events where no one cares about what I do or who I am, it's a waste of time for both of us. I refuse to play games or pander to people who only care about their image, not about actually helping anyone." Ethan, unaccustomed to such direct defiance, bristled. He tried to subtly undermine her authority, suggesting, alternative uses for the funds he'd provided to Harbor Light, ways that would give him more control, more visible credit. He still couldn't grasp that Naomi's work wasn't about credit. It was about genuine change. The tension simmered between them, a silent war of wills, until one night it finally boiled over. The penthouse, usually so silent, erupted in a furious argument. Ethan's voice, sharp with frustration, cut through the air. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? So pure? The truth is, without my money, your precious non-profit wouldn't survive. You'd be back to square one, begging for pennies." The words were cruel, designed to wound, to assert his dominance. Naomi's eyes burned with righteous fury, but her voice remained steady, unwavering. "Your money has helped, Ethan. I won't deny that. But don't think for a second that it gives you the right to control me or what I do. I've built this organization from the ground up, with or without your help, and I'll keep fighting for it, with or without you. My work, my integrity is not for sale. Unlike some people, I don't need a bet to define my worth." Her words hit him like a physical blow, a stunning, unexpected counterattack. Naomi stormed off, leaving Ethan alone in the cavernous silence of the penthouse. The venom of her words, especially the dig about a bet, resonated with a chilling accuracy. He sank into a chair, the anger slowly draining, replaced by a profound, uncomfortable emptiness. Her defiance, her absolute refusal to break, was something he'd never encountered. And for the first time, truly, he began to question himself. Not the man he was, the billionaire, the winner, but the man he had become. He picked up his tablet almost mechanically and typed, "Harbor Light Initiative." He started watching videos of Naomi speaking at events, her voice passionate and unwavering, her dedication palpable. He read testimonials from individuals whose lives had been transformed by her work. Stories of hope, resilience, and the sheer, brutal struggle for survival. He saw photos of the children she helped, their smiles wide, their eyes full of trust. The images, the stories, began to chip away at the carefully constructed walls around his heart. His empire, built on numbers and power, felt insignificant compared to the raw, visceral impact Naomi had on real lives. The reality of his shallow existence, of his gilded cage, suddenly felt suffocating. This was the true twist, the unexpected shift. His plan to use her had backfired. Instead, he was the one being exposed, stripped bare by the undeniable truth of her work and the painful emptiness of his own life. The bet, the money, Marcus, it all began to fade into the background. A new, terrifying yet undeniably compelling question began to form in his mind. What if she was right? What if there was more to life than winning? The struggle for control had ended not in victory, but in a crushing realization. Ethan Vance, the man who had always sought to manipulate others, now found himself utterly, profoundly shaken by the authenticity of one woman. The path ahead was uncertain. But one thing was clear, the old Ethan Vance was starting to crack. And what emerged from the rubble would be something entirely new. The silence that followed Naomi's departure was deafening. It wasn't just the absence of her presence, it was the echoing void within Ethan himself. Her words, so sharp and true, had pierced his carefully constructed facade. My work, my integrity is not for sale. Unlike his entire life had been about transactions, about buying and selling, even when it came to human connection. Now, stripped bare of his usual defenses, he was left with an uncomfortable, unfamiliar feeling. Shame. The bet. The money. Marcus Thorne. It all seemed utterly meaningless. What truly mattered was the scathing reflection in Naomi's eyes and the dawning realization of who he had become. But here's the thing about true change. It doesn't happen with a snap of the fingers. It begins with a single, difficult step, often in the direction of deepest discomfort. For Ethan, that meant returning to the beacon, not to assert control, not to impress, but simply to understand. He arrived unannounced, dressed simply in jeans and a plain sweater, a stark contrast to his usual power attire. Naomi, seeing him, raised an eyebrow, a flicker of guarded skepticism in her eyes. "Ethan, do you think this is a good time?" Naomi, seeing him, raised an eyebrow, a flicker of guarded skepticism in her eyes. "Mr. Vance?" she asked, her voice cool. Ethan just nodded, a slight tremor in his usually confident posture. I want to understand what you do, truly." Naomi, after a long evaluating pause, simply handed him a clipboard. "Good. Start with this shelf. We're reorganizing the donations." That day, Ethan Vance, the CEO who controlled empires, sorted canned goods and folded donated clothes. He worked quietly, listening more than he spoke. He heard the stories of the volunteers, many of whom had been beneficiaries of Harbor Lights programs and were now giving back to their community. He saw the resilience, the gratitude, the sheer human spirit that thrived in this humble building. He listened to a young mother talk about how a simple food package from the Beacon had saved her family from starvation. He saw an elderly man, once homeless, now tutoring children with a gentle patience. His polished demeanor began to fade, replaced by a genuine earnestness. For once, he looked like an ordinary man, trying to do something meaningful. He saw the world not through profit margins, but through the eyes of those who truly struggled, and it humbled him in a way no business deal ever could. The transformation began to ripple beyond the Beacon. Back at Vance Innovations, Ethan started questioning everything. He pushed for policies prioritizing fair wages, ethical sourcing, and genuine community investment, not just token donations. His board, accustomed to his ruthless pursuit of profit, resisted fiercely. They saw him as weak, distracted by some charity fad. But Ethan, now driven by a deeper purpose, was relentless. He wasn't doing it for Naomi, not directly. He was doing it because the man he saw in the mirror, the man he was becoming, demanded it. Yet, there was a shadow looming, a ticking clock that threatened to unravel everything. Marcus Thorne, ever the opportunist, resurfaced. He cornered Ethan at a high-profile industry event, a knowing smirk on his face. "This whole charity act, Ethan, it's impressive, truly. But it's not you, is it? A bet is a bet, after all. 6 months, remember?" The words, delivered with casual cruelty, were like a cold slap. The wager, the despicable lie, the very foundation of his relationship with Naomi was built on this deceit. The weight of it, the bitter truth he had hidden, suddenly felt crushing. He had made progress, he was changing, but it was all tainted by the colossal deception that started it all. He knew with a sickening certainty that he couldn't keep it hidden any longer. He owed Naomi the truth, no matter how painful it would be. The time for playing games was over. The man who had once believed everything had a price, was about to discover the devastating cost of a lie. The bitter truth was poised to unravel everything he had begun to rebuild, and the greatest test of his nascent redemption was about to begin. The weight of the truth pressed down on Ethan, a physical burden he could no longer carry. Marcus Thorne's casual reminder of the bet had ripped open the wound of his deceit, and he knew, with chilling clarity, that he couldn't face Naomi or himself until he laid bare the ugliest secret of their union. He found her at the Beacon, amidst the comforting chaos of community, and asked her to talk. His voice uncharacteristically strained. They found a quiet corner, the sounds of laughter and learning muted by the heavy atmosphere between them. Ethan began, his voice barely a whisper, forcing each word past a throat suddenly tight with apprehension. He confessed everything, The wager, the $50 million, Marcus's challenge, his initial cynical motives. "When I first proposed this arrangement, Naomi," he admitted, his gaze fixed on her, "it wasn't because I cared about your work. It wasn't because I believed in it. It was part of a bet, a despicable game." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Naomi's face, usually so expressive, went utterly blank. Her eyes, which moments before had held a glimmer of guarded hope, slowly widened with shock, then narrowed with an agonizing realization. "A bet," she repeated, her voice sharp, a whisper of disbelief that quickly hardened into a raw, undeniable fury. "You married me because of a bet?" The question wasn't for him, it was for the universe, an accusation against the injustice of it all. Then came the storm. The full force of Naomi's pain, betrayal, and righteous anger erupted. "You didn't just lie to me, Ethan, you used me. You took something as sacred and personal as marriage, a trust I reluctantly gave you for the sake of my community, and you turned it into a stunt, a game for your entertainment." Her voice, though not loud, resonated with a power that left Ethan reeling. "How could you? How could you be so callous? I told you my conditions, I told you my integrity wasn't for sale, and all this time, all your changes, it was just a part of the act." The questions poured out, each one a hammer blow to Ethan's newfound conscience. He tried to explain his change, his genuine shift in perspective, but his words, so eloquent in the boardroom, now felt hollow, meaningless. He had built his world on lies, and now the truth was burning it all down. Her final words, delivered with a chilling finality, shattered any lingering hope. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Ethan, and without trust, there's nothing left." She turned and walked away, her back ramrod straight, leaving Ethan alone in the stunned silence. The door to the community center closed behind her with a quiet click, a tiny sound that echoed like a gunshot in the cavernous silence of his heart. He was left in utter despair. The penthouse, his once impenetrable fortress, now felt like a desolate prison, its luxury meaningless, a cold reminder of the wealth that had blinded him and ultimately cost him the only genuine connection he had ever forged. In the days and weeks that followed, Ethan existed in a haze of regret. His wealth, his power, his empire, none of it could fill the profound emptiness that Naomi's departure had left. He understood now, with a clarity that stung, that the bet had stripped him bare, not of money, but of his last shred of decency. Naomi, meanwhile, channeled her pain into furious, relentless work. She expanded Harbor Light's programs, her resolve hardened by the betrayal, refusing to let Ethan's deceit derail her mission. She couldn't deny that Ethan had shown signs of change, that his actions over the past few months had been genuine. But the foundation of their relationship had been built on a lie, a wound not easily healed. Forgiveness felt like a distant, impossible dream, even as the image of the changed man, the one who worked alongside her at the food pantry, occasionally flickered in her mind. But the initial shock, the deep humiliation, still burned. The truth, bitter and devastating, had been spoken. It had shattered the fragile bridge between them, leaving behind a chasm of hurt and shattered trust. For Ethan Vance, the man who had once thought he could buy anything, the price of his game had just become immeasurably high. The question now was not if he could win, but if he could ever truly atone. The raw pain of Naomi's departure, the sting of her accusation, had burned away the last vestiges of Ethan's arrogance. He was utterly, profoundly broken. But in that brokenness, something new began to stir. There was no more pretense, no more game. The bet, the money, Marcus Thorne, they were irrelevant. What mattered now was proving to himself and perhaps one day to Naomi that the change within him was real, not a temporary phase, not a manipulation, but a fundamental shift in the very core of his being. Ethan doubled down on his efforts. At Vance Innovations, he became a relentless advocate for ethical practices. He faced down his board, who scoffed at his sudden conscience, but he pushed through policies prioritizing fair wages, sustainable practices, and genuine community investment, not just philanthropic window dressing. This wasn't about public image anymore. It was about building a legacy he could be proud of. And for Harbor Light Initiative, his support continued, massive and unwavering. He funneled millions into Naomi's organization, not as a means to win her back, but because he truly believed in the work she was doing. He saw the tangible difference it made, the lives it uplifted, and he knew it was the right thing to do, regardless of whether Naomi ever forgave him. Weeks turned into months. Ethan worked, changed, and waited, grappling with the crushing weight of his past. Then, one quiet evening, an email arrived. From Chloe, his chief of staff. It contained a single photograph. It showed Naomi, standing in front of a newly constructed building, a gleaming new annex for Harbor Light Initiative, a project made possible by Ethan's significant anonymous donations. She was surrounded by children and volunteers, her face tired but radiant, her smile wide and genuine. In that moment, something shifted within Ethan. His journey wasn't about earning Naomi's forgiveness or winning her back. It was about becoming the kind of man who could look in the mirror and be proud of what he saw. He saw her success, her passion, and realized that true redemption wasn't about him at all. It was about contributing, selflessly, to something larger than himself. Meanwhile, Naomi, fierce and independent, continued to build Harbor Light. The sting of betrayal hadn't vanished, but the undeniable impact of the sustained support and the quiet consistency of Ethan's actions began to chip away at her defenses. She heard whispers in the community about how Vance Innovations was different now. She saw the tangible improvements at the Beacon. She couldn't stop thinking about the man he was becoming, not the one who had used her for a bet, but the one who worked quietly alongside her, who seemed genuinely curious, genuinely humble. Could his change be real? She battled with herself, the conflict between her profound hurt and the glimmer of genuine connection she had felt tearing at her heart. Forgiveness was a difficult, perilous path, but the evidence of his transformation was growing undeniable. Months after the confession, the grand opening of the new Harbor Light Community Center was a day of triumph. The air vibrated with joy and gratitude. Naomi stood proudly, accepting heartfelt thanks, her vision now a soaring reality. Then, through the crowd, she saw him. Ethan. He was dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, a far cry from the polished suits he once wore like armor. He looked nervous, vulnerable even. He approached her, a quiet solemnity in his eyes. "Naomi," he began, his voice low, I wanted to offer a personal donation tonight. No strings attached, no conditions, just because I believe in what you do." His gaze was earnest, direct. Then, taking a deep breath, he added, "And for everything else, for the bet, for the way I dismissed you, for the way I tried to control everything, for not seeing you for who you truly are from the start, I am profoundly sorry. More than words can say." Naomi looked at him, her guard still up, but a flicker of something new in her eyes. "You've changed, Ethan," she acknowledged, her tone still guarded. "I see that." Ethan met her gaze, his voice steady. "I don't expect you to forget or to forgive me overnight, but I'm not here to win anything anymore. I just wanted you to know that I see you now, truly, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that." Naomi nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing at her lips. The journey to trust was long, but for the first time, a faint whisper of hope stirred between them. The path to true redemption is paved not with grand gestures, but with consistent, humble action. Ethan Vance had begun that arduous journey, not for a wager, but for the profound change within himself. And as Naomi witnessed his unwavering commitment, the possibility of a different future, built on the fragile yet powerful foundation of respect, began to emerge from the ashes of betrayal. The evening after the community center opening, a quiet moment in her humble apartment, Naomi found an envelope waiting for her. It wasn't from a lawyer or a board member. It was a simple, handwritten letter, undeniably from Ethan. His apologies at the opening had been sincere, but this felt different. She opened it, her fingers tracing the unfamiliar script. "Naomi," the letter began, "you challenged me in ways no one else ever has, and for that, I will always be grateful. I don't know if I'll ever deserve your forgiveness, but I will keep trying, because you and the work you do have changed me in ways I never thought possible. You showed me what truly matters, and for that, there are no words." As she read, a warmth spread through her, a quiet acknowledgement that perhaps, just perhaps, his transformation was real. The letter wasn't a demand for forgiveness. It was a simple, profound statement of truth, and it was exactly what she needed to hear. In the weeks that followed, Ethan continued his support for Harbor Light, consistently and from a respectful distance. He never demanded an audience, never pressured her for a meeting. He just sent regular updates on his ethical initiatives at Vance Innovations, transparent reports on the funding, and quiet inquiries about the programs. Naomi, in turn, continued to build her empire of hope. She watched him, not with suspicion, but with a cautious, growing respect. She watched him, not with suspicion, but with a cautious, growing respect. Slowly, she began to see the depth of his transformation, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet consistency of his actions. He was proving himself, day by day, not to her, but to himself, and to the values he now genuinely embraced. The cracks in his arrogance had widened into chasms, allowing true light to enter. Months later, at a bustling food drive at the Beacon, they found themselves working side by side once more, loading boxes of provisions. The easy rhythm of their collaboration felt familiar, comfortable even. Naomi finally broke the silence. "You've changed, Ethan," she said, a soft smile gracing her lips. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable at first, then softening. "I had to." Naomi nodded, her gaze firm. "I see that. But change isn't enough on its own. It has to last." Ethan met her eyes, a quiet determination in his own. "It will," he promised, his voice low and sincere. "Because this isn't just about you, Naomi. It's about being the kind of man I can live with, and for the first time, I feel like I'm getting there." Naomi's smile widened, a true warmth reaching her eyes. "We'll see," she said, a playful challenge mixed with undeniable hope. Their journey had been messy, painful, and uncertain. It had begun with a cynical bet, escalated through clashes of wills, and faced the devastation of a bitter truth. But it had brought them to a place of mutual respect and understanding, forging a bond far deeper than any contract could define. As the sun began to set over Pacific City, painting the skyline in hues of gold and purple, Ethan turned to Naomi. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice filled with a profound gratitude. "For what?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. "For giving me a chance to change," he said, his gaze fixed on her. "For showing me that it's never too late to start over, that there's more to life than wealth and power, that true value lies in purpose and in genuine human connection." Naomi smiled, the warmth in her eyes finally reaching him fully. "Just don't waste it, Ethan." "I won't," he promised, his voice resolute, and for the first time, they stood not as adversaries or strangers, not as a cynical billionaire and a selfless activist, but as equals, partners in something new and unspoken, ready to face whatever came next together. The future was unwritten, but for both Ethan Vance and Naomi Jenkins, it was now filled with the boundless potential of hope, healing, and the enduring power of connection. And so their incredible journey, born from a cynical wager and forged in the crucible of truth, reached not an ending, but a new beginning. Ethan Vance, the man who believed he could buy anything, learned the invaluable lesson that true worth isn't found in a bank account, but in genuine connection and selfless contribution. And Naomi Jenkins, the woman who fought tirelessly for her community, reminded us all that strength isn't just about what you endure, but about who you become in the face of adversity. Their story is a powerful reminder that even the deepest wounds can heal, that redemption is always possible, and that the greatest transformations happen when we dare to look beyond the surface, both in others and within ourselves. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, don't forget to subscribe, share this video with your friends and family, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Check out our other stories for more captivating content. See you in the next one.